to introduce ourselves, my name is Katie Burke. I'm the Senior Government Program Strategist at Laserfiche, and I work with all of our state and local government clients to make sure that they have the resources they need to be successful and help them to implement new technology initiatives in their municipalities. It's my pleasure to be joined by Ms. Melissa Henley.
Hello, everyone. As Katie said, my name is Melissa Henley. I am Director of Marketing Communications here at Laserfiche. Some of you may recognize me as a familiar face at IIMC conferences. I've spoken with Katie for the last few conferences. I'm also a member of the IIMC Foundation Board, and I'm proud to have been working with our government clients for almost 10 years now.
Yes, fantastic. We love our government clients. So today's class will focus on something that can often be really difficult, getting people to change the way they work. But buy-in is critical for making organizational change happen, especially when you're building support for a new technology initiative. Throughout the session, we'll be talking about technology change management as an example, but if you're working on another initiative, you can imagine how it relates, these philosophies and tools and tricks relate to your initiative as well. Today, we'll cover the reasons why people resist change and how to use neuroscience to your advantage. We'll share some success stories from Laserfiche users who have successfully led change efforts in their own organizations, and we'll also share tips and tricks that you can apply back at your own office. Let's go ahead and get started.
So first up, even though we're all sitting in our own computers, we're going to do a little exercise to get our brains working. I'd like everyone to cross their arms. So Katie and I are going to do it here in our room. And now I'd like you to uncross your arms, shake your arms out a little bit, and cross them the other way.
It's shockingly hard.
It is shockingly hard. And this exercise, while simple, really gets the point of change across. Because I guarantee, based on my experience teaching this class a few times and using this exercise, that 90% of people struggle with this. And it's because when you cross your arms, it's natural. You do it without really thinking about it. And well, ask Katie, what happened when I asked you to cross your arms the other way?
I had to really think about it. You know, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, I'm going to put my left hand here, my right arm is going to loop around. As my yoga teacher says, it was like yoga for the mind.
Yoga for the mind, right? You had to disrupt some of those neural pathways.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it didn't come naturally. You had to stop and think about it, right?
Absolutely.
And were you comfortable with doing it differently?
Definitely not at first.
Definitely not at first. And what could I have done differently to maybe make that a little easier for you?
Well, again, thinking of my yoga teacher, little micro instructions tend to help me. You know, I guess you could have talked me through it. Oh, you should put your right hand right here, you should put your left hand right here, and then we're going to, you know, you could have talked me through it, I suppose. And the other thing is I just follow you blindly. I really don't know why I was crossing my arms the other way.
Katie often follows me blindly, but it's true. I didn't really tell you why. I just sort of said, cross your arms the other way, didn't I?
You did.
I didn't give you a reason why you had to change or a justification for why it would, you know, make a difference. And so these are all, you know, this is a really simple exercise to start getting you thinking about change, especially when it comes to, you know, larger changes that people have to make when it comes to their work days. Because, you know, is it easy to make change in, you know, your day-to-day work environment? No. No, it's not. And so even just something as simple as crossing your arms can really help you start thinking through what you can do to make it easier for people to accept the changes associated with a new technology initiative like document management, and what kind of support is necessary to maintain those changes. You know, if I wanted you to keep crossing your arms the opposite way, Katie, what are the things I need to do to help you maintain that change?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, to be honest, most of the time change is difficult to implement. And, you know, Gilbert
he speaks to the heart.
He speaks to the heart. It's true. Change is hard. And when it comes to technology change in particular, it can often be difficult to implement. And if you're going to be an advocate for change, it helps to understand what you're up against, at least psychologically speaking. Because it's not just that people fear change, although they undoubtedly do. It's also that many people genuinely believe, even though it's unconscious, that when you've been doing something a particular way for some time, it must be a good way to do things. And the longer you've been doing it that way, the better it is.
Because time and success are the exact same thing.
Yes. And of course, my favorite words, we've always done it this way. Which in reality, why have you always done it that way?
Who knows?
Who knows? A lot of times because the person before you did it that way, and the person before them did it that way, and the person before them did it that way. One of my favorite stories I like to, use in change management classes is about, we use this in actually one of our capture workflow classes, is a woman who always cuts the top off the ham before she puts it in the oven. You heard this one, Katie?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So she always will cut the top off the ham before she puts it in the oven for, when she's cooking ham. And finally one day her husband says, why do you do that? And she's like, I don't know, it's how my mom did it. And so her husband goes and asks from, his mother-in-law, why did you do it? I don't know, that's the way my mom always did it. So he goes and finds his grandmother-in-law and says, why did you do it that way? And she's like, oh, it's because I had a small oven and the ham wouldn't fit. And so it goes with questioning assumptions. Just because you've always done it that way doesn't always mean it's the best way to do things. But people get comfortable with the way they do things and believe that's the right way to do it. They don't ever think there's another way. So, but that's with change. It's not always about embracing something unknown. It's about giving up something old, and therefore good, for something new, and therefore not good. Think about crossing your arms. Is there a real reason to cross your arms the opposite way?
No.
But what if I told you, crossing your arms always one way was leading towards an imbalance in your musculature, and to cross your arms the other way would actually help relieve backaches?
Okay, then I do it, yeah.
Okay, so it all comes with having a reason for change. Because why do you cross your arms one way? Just because you've gotten used to it. And would it hurt anything to change? Probably not, but it would be difficult. And if I gave you a reason to change, you probably would. But if there's not a good reason to change, you probably wouldn't.
Why bother?
Why bother? And there's the problem with change right there. Without a reason, it's hard to drive change. And there's the problem right there. Many times leaders don't articulate an opportunity for change to their organization and communicate it widely. And when they do, they're often shocked to see quickly how quickly change can start happening. That's because choice motivates people to be far more committed to driving change than simply being told they have to do it. Choice engages people who are passionate about making their organization better, harnesses their enthusiasm, and empowers them to drive change. It's something that seems very simple, but can be rare for people to work that way. How many of you have ever said, why won't they just do what I say?
I've never said that.
Never? I probably only say it a couple times a day. If only, right? The reality is it's a lot easier to stick with status quo than it is to embrace change. Our company founder always used to tell us, our real competitor isn't another software company. It's something she would call the paper security blanket, and that's, again, it's the way we've always done things. It's the file folders you're used to doing. It's that you're used to walking something down the hall. It's that you're comfortable with the way things have always been. And getting people to give up that paper security blanket can be very difficult. So when you're thinking about change, particularly technology change, you have to think about you're competing against that paper security blanket. You're competing against the way things have always been done. Now, when we're talking about change management, it's helpful to understand what change management really is. And when you boil it down, change management is really just a structured approach for ensuring that change is thoroughly and smoothly implemented and that your organization realizes the lasting benefits of change. Now, change management is a term that gets bandied about pretty freely. Sometimes it's used as a scapegoat for less than stellar results. That initiative failed because we didn't focus enough on change management. And sometimes it's used as a catch-all for project activities that might otherwise get forgotten. You know, when we implement that new process, let's not forget about the change management. And the focus is on the wider impact of change, particularly on people and how they move from a current situation to a new one. The change in question could range from a simple process change to major changes in policy or strategy needed if the organization is to achieve its potential. But change management is about people when it comes down to it. City managers, mayors, city councils, stakeholders, managers, teams, colleagues. All of these are critical components in the delivery of a successful change management initiative. Change management is a methodology that you can use to understand the stages of transition that accompany any organizational change and that affect all of these people. And understanding change management aids you in predicting how people will react to change. Now, when you're tasked with managing change, the first thing to consider is what change management actually means in your situation. Now, typically change management has a few objectives, and typically these cover, ensuring there's active sponsorship for the change at a senior executive level within the organization and engaging the sponsorship to achieve the desired results, basically getting sign-off and a budget for your project. And then, of course, gaining buy-in for the change from those involved and that are affected either directly or indirectly. And involving the right people in the design and implementation of the changes to make sure the right changes are made. Assessing and addressing how changes will affect people. This is the impact. Of course, my favorite, communication. Telling everyone who's affected about the change. And getting people ready to adapt to the changes by ensuring they have the right information, training, and help. Now for this class, Katie and I are going to assume that you already have sponsorship. You have the budget, you have the buy-in from your executive stakeholders, and you're concerned about getting everyone who's going to be affected by the change on board with your initiative.
No easy task.
Yes.
And so when we think about our organizations and how they relate to change, our organizations are really a lot like human brains. They're resistant to change and reliant on stability. But a change management approach that's based in neuroscience or neuro-leadership, as it's becoming known, helps to engage the hearts and the minds of those who need to change. So they will not only be able to accept the solution, but they'll actually be willing to accept it as well. So Melissa.
Yes, Katie.
If your boss told you to rearrange your desk and gave you no explanation, how would you react?
I would do it without question. No, of course not. I would ask why. Why does it matter? I like my things the way they are.
But does it really matter if your stapler's on the left side of your desk instead of the right side of your desk?
It does to me.
Does it really drastically affect your productivity?
No, but why do I have to change the way it is? I like it how it is.
And you're right, that's exactly how most people would react. It's a minuscule request. It really doesn't matter, if where your stapler is for 90% of the population, but most people's immediate reaction would be to resist your question and demand. And this example really demonstrates how our brains are prone to react negatively to change. According to social neuroscience researchers, the reason lies in human evolution. In short, our human ancestors depended as much on social belonging for survival as they did on food and shelter. Poor social standing on both an individual and a group basis could actually lead to a higher mortality rate. So when a person's social environment changes, it challenges the sense of stability, or more specifically, our brain sense of stability. If the brain decides that the change is actually threatening, then it will resist or avoid the change as much as possible. So fight or flight mode, as it's often called. Though the workplace is often perceived as very logical, transaction-based, straightforward, data-driven, it's still occupied by humans, and humans are emotional beings. When leaders drive some kind of change in the organization, they must consider the impact that it's going to have on their people. And an effective strategy for creating change requires several elements, but one of the most important is to convince people to alter their attitudes, to move from rejection to openness, at least, or embrace at best. If you can create change in people's attitudes, then it's much easier to change their behavior. We can think of any attitude on a continuum from pro to con. Wherever your own attitude is along the continuum, you're willing to entertain some other views, but only really within a narrow range around your own attitude. And this range is the latitude of acceptance, or what we call the okay zone. But this is a crucial point. When attitudes are too far away from our okay zone, we not only don't buy them, but we actively retrench against them. We marshal all of our resources to oppose the person making the argument. And if we want to change someone's attitude, first we need to understand where that person's okay zone. And we can do that by asking questions to identify where they are on the continuum right now. So we should be considering things such as, what is this particular stakeholder's current attitude about the proposed change? And what are some small steps that we can take to alter their current attitude closer to where we need it to be? Can we enlist evangelists to help us advocate the change? I always love working with Melissa because Melissa is such a great champion. If I am starting a new project at Laserfiche, I always tell Melissa about it and share my vision because I know that she's respected and known throughout the organization, and she can help carry that message for me. And people will listen to her, and it warms up my audience for me. And the last question is arguably the most important. How much change do you require from each person? Do you need them to come around entirely, or is it sufficient to just move a little bit closer towards the okay zone without being a full supportive advocate? And I think a lot of times we feel like people need to be these huge fans of the project that we're working on, and that's just not the case. You're not going to have everybody raving about your project. You just need them to be willing to move forward with it.
Yeah, sometimes, I think that's a really good point, Katie. Sometimes we get trapped by thinking we have to get everyone to, you know, be an evangelist or be a huge raving fan of our project, when in reality, sometimes we just need people to be neutral. Sometimes we need people to not actively be against us. So really looking at the people in your organization, looking at the stakeholders, and understanding who you really need to be your champions, and who you really just kind of need to be okay, and who you really, you know, just need to not be actively against it, really helps you in your activities as a change leader.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with neutrality. It doesn't go against you. So before we begin any change initiative, it's important to connect the project with these people and attitudes that we need to change. And so helping a project team identify and inventory which employees have to do their jobs differently is an important anchor and starting point for effectively positioning change management. And the 4P exercise can help us think through this. So the way this exercise works is you start with a blank sheet of paper, and you divide the paper into 4 columns. You label the first column project name, and you answer the question, what is this project? The second column is labeled with purpose, and you aim to answer the question of why are we changing? The third column is about the particulars, and really be specific here about what you are changing. And then in the fourth column, you have people, and you answer the question of who will be changing. And after you think through these 4 columns, ask yourself the question, how much of the purpose can be achieved if the people do not adopt the change to their day-to-day work? Or said another way, what percentage of the purpose of this project is dependent on the people doing their jobs differently? So for example, if an organization wants to implement a document management system, the project name might be Electronic Document Management and Automated Agenda Item Submittal Initiative. The purpose of the project might be to reduce the time spent searching for files and creating agenda packets. Another purpose might be to reduce the amount of money spent printing agenda packets. The particulars we're changing are the way our documents are stored and accessed, how agenda items are submitted and approved, and how council members access the agenda packets. The people involved are the item submitters, the clerk, and the council for the agenda packet portion, and all city employees that need to access files are affected by the electronic document repository. They'll be going to this new system instead of filing cabinets. And after completing this exercise, you'll have a clear idea of who needs to change what, and you're better equipped to figure out the appropriate steps to slowly encourage adoption. After all, for every project or initiative, success is determined by how effectively those individuals in that final column adopt the change, but they won't always immediately embrace change. And that's where understanding the change curve is really important.
Yes. Thanks, Katie. The change curve is a popular and powerful model used to understand the stages of personal transition and organizational change. And it helps you predict how people will react to change, so you can help them make their own personal transitions and make sure that they have the help and support they need. Now, when you're going through the 4P exercise, you'll understand a little more about what people need to change. But remember, personality underpins how people will respond to change. So understanding the differences in personalities allows leaders to predict how different personality types are likely to respond to a situation or change, and then to deploy the correct leadership or coaching style in order to smooth the transition from resistance or acceptance. And that's another reason you need to think through your latitudes of acceptance or your okay zones. And this approach is something you're going to want to work through. Because remember, it's not all about technology. It doesn't matter about how much money or time you've invested in technology or training if people still persist in their old ways. Because organizations and people don't just change because of new technology, new processes, or new structures. They change because the people in the organization change, and the organization adapts and changes too. And only when people within it have made their own personal transitions can an organization truly reap the benefits of change. So Katie, did you take any psychology classes when you were in college?
You bet I did.
Yeah, me.
Psych 101.
That's about all I took too. Did you ever hear of the Kubler-Ross curve, the 5 stages of grief?
Yeah, we did study that one.
So did we. And for those of you who didn't take Psych 101, the Kubler-Ross curve is, or the 5 stages of grief, as you may have heard of it, is a model consisting of the various stages of emotions which are experienced by a person who is approaching death or is dealing with an intimate death. And it's comprised of the emotions including shock, denial, frustration, depression, decision, and integration. And while it's not, or was not originally intended to play a major role in the understanding of how change impacts an organization, what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross found is that the concept of a change curve and the natural, predictable, and widely understandable emotions it contains fits perfectly in the enterprise-level change management journey, because it turns out change is actually pretty similar to the process of grieving. And that makes sense because both processes involve a loss of the way things were and the adjustment to a new normal. And because every organization needs to initiate and experience changes, whether in management, technology, policies, processes, or systems, understanding the change curve is really important to understanding how to smoothly implement change. So the change curve, as you can see, shows a positive move towards change where acceptance is the ultimate outcome. Unlike the 5 stages of grief, you get to skip depression, which is good.
I'll take that, yeah.
However, unless you as a change leader are actively helping move people through the various stages of the curve, then individuals may become stuck at any stage, thereby making change more difficult, if not impossible. So how do you help guide them through change in a positive and effective way? Let's take a look at our first stage of dealing with change, denial. It's not just a river in Egypt. So this is the stage at which the employee or employees may be in a position of shock or denial. They may not be able to digest the fact that they have to undergo change and adapt to something new. They may need time to adjust to changes, and for a long time they may deny that they actually need any at all. In fact, once they receive information about the change, it's just a natural reaction to deny that there's a need for change or that it's even happening. In a change sense, typical words used at this stage are, "It won't work here," "We've tried it before," "Why is this happening?" Or my favorite, "Things are fine the way they are."
Aren't they always?
Yes, except usually not. Now, some leaders working on a change initiative might be tempted to say, "I know this change will be for the better and everyone will just have to get used to it." However, my way or the highway attitude fosters a lot of anxiety and distrust. People will deny there's need to change and actively try to prove the new method or solution won't work. Not productive, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah, and another leadership technique that definitely won't work here is micromanagement. Micromanagement has the same effect as steamrolling because it actually impedes people's autonomy. It actually impairs analytical, creative, and problem-solving abilities. So when you're looking at leadership styles, steamrolling, micromanagement, these cause leaders to undermine their staff and make initiating change far more difficult. Now, some leadership techniques that do work. For most people in denial, change is not easy to accept. I mean, change is not easy to accept regardless. Yes, even for something as simple as crossing your arms. And for people looking at change, particularly the way they're used to working, they react with shock. Most people don't believe that the change is happening, and they'll try to ignore thinking and talking about it. This denial is mostly on an internal level, and to avoid showing off denial, people will focus on anything but the change. People will shift their attention to the past and familiar feelings that make them feel secure. This will cause a dip in team morale. And at this stage, it's for you as a leader to help people understand what is happening and how it affects them. Keeping them informed and familiarizing them with what's happening helps build up a sense of security. As a leader, you need to approach this stage with what might seem like excessive communication. Your role is to help employees understand why this change is happening and how it can be helpful. This stage demands communication so employees can have full knowledge and can have their questions answered. As a leader, you need to make it a point to avoid overwhelming people with a lot of information in one go and give it slowly and gradually so people can absorb it. Think of this stage as a marketing campaign. You need to sell the idea. It's your job to create a vision for the future. Tell them what it'll be like, why this will be better. And remember, it's not just sending out an email announcement and your job is done. We're going to have a new, a new electronic document and agenda item submittal system. The end, you need to have a dialogue. Talk to people about the benefits. Deal with their concerns.
And is there really such thing as excessive communication? I don't think so.
Not really. Because really, Katie's right. Everyone has different preferences when it comes to how they like to be communicated with and how they process information. So having an understanding of the different personality types within your team can have a massive impact on how you support them through the change process. And this first stage of the change curve is a critical stage for communication. You want to make sure you communicate often, but also ensure you don't overwhelm people. People will only be able to take in a limited amount of information at a time, particularly if they're in denial. They may be scared, they may be overwhelmed, they may be frightened, and that's going to impact what they hear and how they hear it. Think about it as a doctor. When you receive news you might not necessarily want to hear, you're always advised to have someone with you because what happens?
You forget half of what they say.
You forget half of what they say. And this is that same sort of meant to fight or flight. We're back to the neuroscience. People aren't always, their adrenaline's up, they're not really thinking clearly, even though this isn't anything that dramatically impacts their physical life. This is their livelihood. So they're not always thinking clearly. They might not be able to take in as much information as you would like. So limited amounts of information, but you want to make sure people know where to go for more information if they need it, and ensure that you're available to answer any questions that come up. And most importantly, don't be concerned if you have to keep repeating things. You remember, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, and then tell them again.
Exactly.
The important thing is that they understand, and it may require repetition. Focus on maximizing that face-to-face communication and addressing the what's in it for me issues. You want to allay that denial by making people feel comfortable with the idea of change, and it's all about reassurance at this stage. And one way to do this is by telling stories. Neurologists say that our brains are programmed much more for stories than for abstract ideas. Tales with a little drama are remembered far longer than any slide crammed with analytics. Personal stories also create a more intimate atmosphere, one that communicates the feeling that we're all in it together. And remember, if it's appropriate for your organization, the use of humor can reduce stress and encourage your audience to feel that you really understand them.
So what tools and techniques can you use to draw people out of denial? As Melissa said, the way to combat this stage is with information, and we can be strategic about the way that we deliver this information. We need to convey what's happening in a way that emphasizes that this project is not only unavoidable, here to stay, but it's also urgent, strategic, and helpful for the organization as a whole. And we can do this through a combination of executive support and real-life scenario depictions. If we've gotten to the point where we're onboarding our peers and colleagues, chances are executive management has already okayed the decision to move forward and sees value in the project. It's important to harness this executive buy-in to show others that this is a strategic decision for the organization. While in the best case, the peers you're trying to get buy-in from, might like and respect you, they might go to lunch with you, but they also might not see your project as important or urgent to their work. If their boss and their boss's boss, however, are talking about the project and how excited they are about it, it's likely that the users are going to understand that the organization is committed to this project. Try to get executives to model the way. If they can share how they're going to use the new technology and even potentially show others how they're using the system, it will help your peers to buy in too. How many of you know people that don't practice what they preach? Right, Melissa? It's easily done. It's so easy to say, you need to do this, and then not actually do it yourself. The leadership starts at the top, and we need this philosophy and this project ideology to trickle down. But with that being said, executive buy-in doesn't have to be a cold directive. It doesn't have to be, you need to do this because I said so. For example, one of our customers in New York purchased an electronic records management system, and they were working on a project to scan all their documents from across the county into the system. And since some people were hesitant to give up their precious paper, that paper security blanket that we talked about, their clerk actually made neon t-shirts that said, ask me how we're saving money. And she handed them out to all of the executive leaders to wear while they were in the process of collecting documents. So it was a physical reminder that this is a good project for the entire county and that leadership was unified in this effort, and willing to look a little silly too.
And neon pink, really?
The other thing we need to do is we really need to make people think that this project is real and see it as a real project for them specifically in stage one. It's great to say that we want to improve processes in our organization, but what does that really mean for our accounts payable clerk, for example? We can help others see what this project entails and the impact that it has by posing real-life scenarios of what daily life will be like after this project has been completed. At Laserfiche, we like to talk about sharing the dream. Pick a few activities that everyone dreads, a few common pain points to focus on. Maybe at your organization, that's filing papers. People hate going to the filing cabinets and getting the hanging folders and filing the papers, and it just takes forever. So then, in that case, you could share how your eForms initiative is going to help people because they're not going to have to file papers anymore. These eForm submissions are automatically filed in an electronic repository and no need to consult the filing cabinets anymore. Help them to actually visualize what their future state will look like after the technology has been implemented. And we have an exercise to help with that.
Oh, because I was going to say I have a great example here. When we automated our travel process, one of the things I hated the most was getting back and taping receipts to a piece of paper and then making a copy and then filling out my expense report and then walking it down the hall. And when they told me you can just take a picture of your receipt on your phone and attach it on your phone to the form in your mobile app and just be done with it, it was
life-changing.
Life-changing. And that's all they had to tell me. I was like the biggest advocate from it from then on. And that is really looking towards the future state, Katie.
Absolutely. So we like to use a simple exercise to help us think through how individuals are going to be impacted by change. And this activity is based on the 3 states of change: the current state, the transition state, and the future state. The idea of change occurring in 3 phases is found in most change management literature. For most change leaders, it's easy to think about the 3 phases of change from an organizational perspective with documented processes and procedures. It's what we've been selling all along. But the goal of this exercise is to extend thinking one more level by adding the perspective of individual future states. All of these projects and initiatives ultimately impact individuals and how they do their jobs. Said another way, as the project or initiative is implemented, individual employees have to move from their own current state through the transition state and into their own future state. So to complete this exercise, you start with a blank sheet of paper. You draw a line down the middle. It's time to separate the page into two sides. On the left-hand side, you describe the future state from the organization's perspective. And this is usually pretty easy. Like I said, we've already been selling the idea that our organization is going to save time and money with our project. On the right-hand side, describe the future state for 5 individuals impacted by the change, how their job will be different after the project is implemented. So using the example of implementing electronic document management again, the future state of the organization would include things such as paper reduction, streamlined processes, and more accessible information. On an individual level, our clerk's future state would include things such as less time spent copying and less time spent searching for files because they're all in a central repository. For our council, the state would include pulling up agendas on iPads instead of paper packets. From an IT perspective, there would be a new system to support and monitor, and so on. And after completing this exercise, we're able to see that the perspective of change happens on 2 levels, the organizational level and the individual level. In this exercise, you use a fairly simple and accessible model, the 3 states of change, as the foundation for what needs to transition, and therefore you're better able to see reality for those individuals that need to change. And after we've made change real for our stakeholders, let's talk about how we can handle a feeling that unfortunately is just inevitable, and that's anger in stage 2.
Yes, because as people start to react to change, they may start to feel concern, resentment, or fear. They may resist change actively or passively. They may feel the need to express their feelings and concerns, which turns into venting their anger. That leads us to stage 2 of the change curve, anger. Now, resistance to change begins in this stage as people realize that change is actually taking place and there's no way to avoid it. You know, saying that won't work or we've always done it this way, it doesn't matter. They could deny change all they want, but it's happening. There's no way to avoid it. And at this stage, people will start to complain, become bitter. They may blame others. If only you did your job, this wouldn't be happening. And for the organization, this stage is the danger zone. And for you as a change leader, if this stage is badly managed, this is where you may see chaos. During this stage of the change curve, feelings like anger, self-doubt, fear, and anxiety can build up, which can significantly stagger the progress of the change process, besides causing morale and productivity to take a nosedive. This emotional mayhem is because people are being pushed out of their comfort zone. Arguments, playing the blame game, and non-cooperation are some ways in which team members may show resistance to the change. So this stage needs careful planning and preparation. As someone responsible for change, you should prepare for this stage by carefully considering the impacts and objections that people may have. This is where walking through the 4P and the future states exercise comes in handy. Your role here is also to lend an ear to team members' concerns, demystify the myths surrounding the change, empathize with them, and encourage them to pass through this stage. So when the gravity of the situation settles in and reality becomes clear, people may begin to feel fear from what lies ahead, which can turn into anger or resentment. Because, you know, when you look at work from a day-to-day basis, you know, how do we usually feel, Katie? Very comfortable, right? We get used to things. We kind of get into our routines. We kind of get, you know, comfortable with the way we do things. And when you get into a comfort zone, knowing that you need to learn, change, and adapt can make you angry. Why me? Well, exactly. So this stage has to be managed very sensibly because people can tend to vent their anger. And you really need to focus, again, on clear communication and support. Understand that this is just a natural reaction, and with time, the anger will pass away and make way for acceptance. So when it comes to communication, you really want to focus on empathy. You want to brace the storm by being an ear. You want to listen. When it comes to communication, embrace informal channels and multiple forms of communication. Take people out for coffee, stop by their desk, talk in the break room. send an email, you know, give a small group presentation. You want to give people time to understand the change while keeping communication channels open. Now, one thing that I want to really emphasize is that while people need the ability to vent, it does not mean you need to always take everything they say into consideration. One technique I like to use is that when someone comes to me to vent or complain, I always start the conversation by, what do you want out of this conversation? Just to kind of set the stage. What do you want out of this conversation, Katie? Do you just want me to listen? Do you just want to vent? Or do you want me to do something with this information?
A lot of times, I venture to guess, people just want to be heard. They just want to vent.
That's exactly it. 9 times out of 10, people just want to vent. They just kind of want to get something off their chest. They want to feel like someone's listening, that someone cares, and then they're done with it. But as a leader, what your job is to listen to those people that are venting. While they may not want you to do necessarily do something about what they're venting about, is listen to and see if there's any commonality running through what they're venting about. Are they maybe saying, you know, it's too difficult, so they're spending a lot of time manually entering metadata into the new system? Well, maybe there's a way you can fix that. So the important thing to realize is that allowing people to speak openly with you fosters that trust and openness. It's all about empathy. And making yourself, you know, sort of available, again, helps people sort of get it off their chest, move through that anger stage and on to acceptance. And make sure you address any honest, you know, real problems early on with clear communication and support, and by taking action to minimize and mitigate problems that people experience. As a reaction to change is very personal and can be very emotional, it's often impossible to preempt everything. So listen and watch carefully during this stage so you can respond to the unexpected.
So in stage 2, we can combat anger by building a community of support. When we feel like there are people and resources in place to listen to us and support our transition, it feels a lot less like a personal attack and more like this positive momentum that's forming in the organization. And it's important to bring as much fun as possible to this stage. So for example, Melissa, have you ever had to transition from one boss to another?
I have actually had to transition between 4 different bosses in the last 3 years.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And it can be really difficult to start over. If you've built a reputation with your manager, you know what they expect. They know what to expect from you, how to submit your projects, and you know, you have this reputation that when someone new comes along, you have to start over.
You're comfortable.
Exactly. That seems to be a common thread here. But assuming you liked your previous boss, it could be really upsetting to get a new one. If they take you out to lunch, however, and ask you about your preferences and your work style, and they show their support, you're much more likely to let go of your anger and think, maybe this guy or gal won't be so bad.
That informal two-way communication.
Definitely. So in the case of onboarding users to a new project, some ways to build a support network are to establish an internal user group, host lunch and learns, or throw a kickoff party. So I know at Laserfiche we have quite a few customers that are involved in user groups. In fact, the picture on this slide is from one of the user groups that we hosted not too long ago. And the things that we hear over and over again about user groups is that it's a great opportunity to bring your challenges and get responses from people who have been through the situation before. You can learn, here's what I would never do again, or here's something that's really successful. But they're also a great tool to build camaraderie and support around a project. By hosting regular meetings for staff, these can be optional meetings, this allows you to share best practices and offer advice to those that are struggling. As Melissa said, it's important to listen to people vent. Management experts say that a complaint is one of the best things you can receive, though it often doesn't feel like it at the time. But when we have complaints, we know the issues and we can address them.
It's actually one of the worst things when people stop complaining because that means they no longer care.
Exactly, exactly. And it can mean that they're secretly brooding on their own and they're not giving you a chance to fix the problem. User groups are an approachable place to raise questions and even better, to share success. It's a great opportunity to spotlight your champions and have them market the project for you. Relating back to our previous discussion on executive sponsorship, Wouldn't it be great if senior management presented at your first user group on how they're looking forward to use the technology? Sometimes as change champions, we can feel like a broken record, but by letting others share their excitement, skeptics will feel the enthusiasm rising around them. Loudoun County, Virginia, for example, has seen a lot of success with an internal user group. They meet quarterly, and what began as a few people just meeting to brainstorm project ideas eventually grew into a 50-person plus regular meeting. They asked vendors and partners to donate giveaways to encourage participation, and each meeting features a success story from another department. This has really helped them to build cross-departmental connections and create a culture of support across the entire county. Similarly to user groups, Lunch and Learn workshops can be a great way to dissolve anger and build support. Oftentimes, people are angry and upset just because they don't understand. But traveling workshops enable you to explain and demonstrate what's happening in a very specific way for a very specific audience. Maureen Reynolds, Tompkins County Clerk, says you can have the best software in the world, but if people aren't comfortable with it, they won't use it. And these workshops allow you to really get people comfortable on a small and group level. So to make a workshop effective, start by developing specific messaging for each group. So maybe you divide your workshops by department. In your first workshop, you go to HR and you demonstrate to them how their new electronic records will be stored and how they can find and retrieve HR files. Speak their terms and use their examples. Then schedule the meetings and bring the meetings to your audience. And when you go, be sure to bring food, because there is just a little bit of magic in food that makes people happier. And after the meeting is over, make sure you're following up with any relevant training guides or screenshots so everyone can remember what they learned. And one of my favorite techniques to lead through stage 2 is to host a kickoff party. Ramsey County, Minnesota purchased an enterprise content management system, and they hosted a fantastic kickoff party to launch the software adoption. They went in with the philosophy that if people are laughing, then that means they're paying attention. And the party featured a paper graveyard where staff could toss old papers that are ready for scanning, and they had games and they had food. It was a lot of fun. The Community Action Partnership of Ramsey and Washington counties also had a fun kickoff party where they created a video to showcase how helpful their new project was going to be. The video started by highlighting some of the challenges with their current system, and this portion was like an old black and white Western film. Then they introduced the new technology, and magically everything turned to color. And it was fun, it was funny, and most importantly, it got people engaged. It's really hard to be angry when you're having fun. This is a great way to get everyone burying their anger and putting a smile on their face. And regardless of whether you implement a user group, a workshop, a kickoff party, or any combination of the three, your techniques should all aim to create a culture of support. You want people to feel like they can be free to raise their concerns, and they have a network of support to help them find a solution. Through strategic use of support techniques, eventually people's anger will wear off, and they will start realizing that they need to learn more about the technology you're implementing. It's here to stay, and they got to figure this out. And that's when we can start leading through stage 3.
Yeah, stage 3 is the turning point for individuals and for the organization as a whole. Once you turn the corner to stage 3, everyone starts to come out of the danger zone and is on the way to making a success of the changes. The next stage of the change curve is the exploration phase, where team members leave out arguments, they leave their anger behind, and instead they become a part of the change. This is where people start acting and learning new ways so as to constructively contribute towards change. A fresh wave of thinking sets in where people understand the rationality of the change process and the importance of their role in it. What's worth noting here is that even though people may have started contributing towards the change, they may still not have completely accepted it at this stage. It's mostly an explorative stage where people are experimenting with the change to find out what's in store for them. This stage can stretch on if you don't intervene and help team members to participate actively and provide them with the knowledge and training that will make them feel comfortable and secure in their new roles. Because this stage, the exploration stage, is where confusion and doubt can set in, but it's also a good sign as people are beginning to move on. Signs of acceptance will start shining through as people will ask questions such as, do I carry on with my work? What will I do differently? How do I use this new technology? You'll start seeing signs of negotiation with your technology, like maybe we can try it this way, or can we do it like this, or what if we tried it this way? That's a sign that they're really engaging with the process, exploring and offering ideas.
And I'll take negotiation over a hard no any day.
Exactly. And when you get to exploration, you're going to see a lot of people understanding the change and trying to find the best possible scenario for them to fit in and adapt to. Be cautious because people may try to learn only what they think is important. But as a leader, your role should be to ensure that everyone gets the best of training so that the change incorporated can run successfully. This stage may take time, and for the organization and for everyone who works there, figuring out their best options for what will help them move ahead will be the focus. You can't rush people to learn quickly or adapt to changes fast. What you can do as a leader is lay good foundations for this stage by making sure that people are well-trained and are given opportunities to experience what the changes will bring. Be aware that this stage is vital for learning and acceptance, and that it takes time. You aren't going to expect people to be 100% productive during this time. You want to build in contingency time so people can learn and explore without too much pressure. And individually, as people's acceptance grows, they'll need to test and explore what the changes need. They'll do this more easily if they're helped and supported to do so, even if this is just, giving them enough time to explore the new system. Yeah. And this stage is all about facilitation. It's all about keeping the conversation going. Now, it's no surprise that communication is a constant through this entire process. Remember, as a leader, your job is all about communication. You want to communicate things like timelines for the project so people understand and can share their thoughts. You want to encourage involvement and allow visibility as to what needs to be done. But when it comes to facilitation, you could be asking, what is facilitation exactly? And how is it different from all the communication I've been doing already? Well, technically, the definition of facilitation is to make easy. And really, to be an effective facilitator, you need to be objective. And especially having just passed through stage 2, the anger stage, it might be a little difficult to maintain that objectivity. It just means that you need to be neutral. You need to focus on the process, particularly if you're facilitating discussion on how to make change work. And so a couple tips on issues you're likely to run into when you're facilitating discussion. For instance, if you run into someone who talks too much. Ever happen to you, Katie?
Well, I am Chatty Cathy, so I am typically that person that does talk too much.
Katie's being kind because she's usually in meetings with me who never met a sentence she didn't like. So when you're dealing with someone who talks too much and is overwhelming the conversation, as a facilitator, really you're going to want to redirect the discussion to another person or another topic. Alternatively, you can break down the group into smaller task groups so they can't overwhelm the discussion. One technique I like to use is make our Chatty Cathy the scribe and have them writing things down on the whiteboard and kind of give them that task for a while. So they're a little bit out of the discussion, so you can give everyone else a chance to talk.
That explains why you asked me to do that.
I just gave away my secret. But alternatively, what if you're dealing with someone who won't talk, who won't share their thoughts with the group? That's where you're going to want to look, again, smaller discussions or pair share discussions, one-on-one discussions. A lot of times people are nervous about sharing their ideas with the group. They don't want to be quote-unquote wrong when really they're, when you're talking about these things, there are no wrong answers. Ask opinion questions. How do you feel about this? That there is no wrong answer to how you feel. And this can encourage participation by reducing the fear of answering incorrectly. Another strategy is to have people write out their answers and then share them with the group. Having the words written out can make it easier for someone who's nervous about speaking in front of a group to actually share their thoughts because they're not speaking extemporaneously. What about a discussion that goes off track? That, of course, never happens.
Always focused and clear and concise.
One way you can deal with this is to list the questions or issues you want to cover on the board, or summarize the discussion on a whiteboard as you proceed. You can also stop and ask someone to summarize where the discussion is when it's starting to go off track. Katie, that's great. Can you, maybe wrap up where we are right up until this point? And then, it kind of allows you to take a break and get back on track. And last but not least, what if someone doesn't agree with you? Even though we're through the anger stage, someone may not agree with you while you're in a group discussion.
That's always uncomfortable. In front of everyone, somebody's being potentially aggressive or just combative.
It's particularly difficult when you're facilitating a discussion. Some people really just like to argue for the sake of argument. Some people just really like to hear their own voice. And as a facilitator, you usually lose if you take the bait. Some people just want attention. So simply giving them recognition while moving on often takes care of the problem. You can, if they're saying things like, how do you really know that? Or you're not really saying that, you can use a technique I like to call, which is the boomerang. You can really say, what I'm saying is, fill in the blank. But now I'd like you to share your perspective, Katie. So turning the question back to the questioner forces him or her to take responsibility for their opinion. So again, facilitation, this is important in this stage, especially when you're dealing with training and you're likely to be talking to more groups.
Definitely. So when we think about stage 3, we want to do everything in our power to support exploration. As people explore, they gain comfort with the new normal and they move closer to acceptance. There are a number of techniques that we can employ to foster experimentation. First, we can create a sandbox for exploration. Then we can separate out some small steps to move people closer to adoption, and then eventually we can start the transition. Oftentimes, technology systems will allow you to set up a demonstration environment or a test system. Try to create a test environment that allows users to figure out how exactly the solution will work and play around without worrying about breaking something or accessing confidential information. You could help them out by scripting out a sample scenario so they can walk through how the new process will work for them. At Laserfiche, we like to make it fun. So sometimes the scenario involves the laser investigators, where trainees play the role of Sherlock Holmes and they're submitting investigation reports and looking through case files. Or you could encourage your trainees to be creative in developing their own scenario. Regardless of who scripts out the activity, this is an effective way to show support to our users because people are more engaged in hands-on activities as opposed to just directives, which is why we're going to keep moving on so you guys can start exploring as well. As people begin to explore the new system, you want to provide a runway for onboarding. Start by breaking down the transition into steps and train users on bite-sized pieces of information and give them time to adjust before moving on. So for example, many customers implementing electronic records management will scan the documents into their new system but keep the paper files for a few weeks. That way people still have a safety net if they're struggling to adapt. Start by scanning archive content and then showing them how to access the files. And then later you could have the discussion about how to handle future incoming content. Really break it down into more manageable pieces as opposed to flipping a switch. And eventually, we want to start moving people over to the new process and the system. So set reasonable timelines for switching over. With the team, pick out which activities you want to adopt first. This will likely correlate to the baby steps that we just identified. Then set clear expectations on what will be happening and schedule a time to switch. This doesn't mean that you have to completely abort the old process. It just means that you're self-enforcing a break-off point. And by giving people room and time to experiment, we're able to let the skeptics come to terms with what's happening without being forceful and rigid. People appreciate that you've taken the time to consider what they will need to change and you're being conscientious in the way that you're handling the transition. Taking this approach will ultimately help people move towards acceptance, that final stage in the adoption curve.
That's right. This stage is the one you've all been waiting for. This is where change starts to become second nature and people embrace the improvements to the way they work. Acceptance is the final stage of the change curve, when productivity and emotional normalcy are completely restored. Team members feel more in control as they settle down into their new roles. Employees accept that change is necessary and engage with the new technology. Work activities return to normal as team members begin to cooperate wholeheartedly. As the change leader, you finally start to see the benefits you work so hard for. Your team and organization starts to become productive and efficient, and the positive effects of change become apparent. Nirvana.
Heavenly.
Exactly. Now, when you get to the acceptance stage, it's important for you to acknowledge and reward team members for their active contributions to keep them motivated and committed. Leaders should reward employees for their dedication and acceptance and also recognize the success of the change initiative through ROI, anecdotal evidence, and other methods. And once the team accepts the change, it's also time to start looking ahead to future improvements on what you've already implemented. And really, stage 4, it's the stage that you wait for when you're introducing a new change into the enterprise. This is when people embrace the change, accept the situation, and start building new hopes and aspirations. They realize and understand the importance of the change and actively start working towards it. While some people may resign to the change because of a lack of any other option, others may resign to the reality in a positive way. The managers that you mapped out in your 4P exercise, they finally begin to see the benefits of the hard work they've put in. Everyone's showing improvement, overall productivity begins to improve, and it's time to celebrate and move towards a brighter future and expect more benefits around the corner. Now, while you're busy counting your benefits, don't forget to celebrate success. The journey may have been rocky. Certainly it may have been at least a little uncomfortable for some people involved, but everyone deserves to share in the success. What's more, by celebrating achievement, you establish a track record of success, which will make things easier the next time a change is needed as you expand your initiative into new processes or new departments. So repeat and reinforce the objectives and strategies. You want to continue building that buy-in. Create good feedback mechanisms so you understand the benefits you're achieving. You hear what's going well. And you definitely want to continue rewarding people and celebrating your successes.
We always say, good work gets you more work.
Yes, it sure does.
Share those successes so next time you have a project, it will come, you're ready to go. And just because we've reached a point of acceptance, it really doesn't mean our work is done. We need to make sure that we're providing resources to reinforce the positive experience that people are having and make sure that they have sufficient ongoing support. And there are a variety of resources and strategies that we can employ to ensure long-term success. We can do this by enlisting people to share their excitement on an ongoing basis and by conducting regular trainings with supplemental materials. So I personally find case studies to be really helpful when I'm selecting a product or service. Do you like them, Melissa?
I do. I purchase a lot of technology, and I find it really helpful to read case studies, particularly about marketing organizations at companies that are similar to mine or facing similar problems.
Yeah, it's kind of a light bulb moment. You're like, oh, somebody just like me did this.
Exactly.
I can do this too.
Exactly.
I hardly go out to eat anymore without essentially a case study. I go on Yelp and research what I should order.
Katie is a pro Yelper.
I am. I love case studies. They reassure me that the product or service is to the standard that I expect, and they usually spark some ideas of how my life could be different if I were using the product too. So who says case studies have to be externally facing? Why not do some internal promotion of your successes too? The City of Boca Raton, Florida sends a regular email showcasing some of the great uses of their document management system. They'll highlight a new process that they've automated since the last email and share some of the results they've seen. This has brought a couple benefits. First, they've been able to recognize the hard work of others and show appreciation for their supporters, which has helped them to build champions. It's also sparked ideas in other departments of how they could be using the software in new ways. And finally, it's reinforced to executive management that this project is making a difference in the organization. Outside of a newsletter, though, you can also share these case studies at your user groups. It's a great way to show the broad support for the initiative and get people excited about the impact that it's making. But in order for people to stay engaged with the project over months and years to come, they're going to need to feel comfortable with the new processes and technologies. So even if you do an initial launch training, people unfortunately are bound to forget some of what you taught or get going with the system, and they'll have new questions or new areas of interest and focus. Plus, new hires start all the time. So it's important to host regular ongoing trainings. As we know, training is most effective when people can be hands-on, so try to make it engaging and focused. And what can be even more sustainable than classroom training is to set up a series of web-based trainings. You might consider setting up a WebEx event, a video conference, and recording the screen so that you can share basic how-to trainings and make it available via your intranet. This avoids, having to repeat common content that everyone needs to know. It'll save you time while delivering valuable content to your users. Ramsey County, again, shared a video tutorial when they were launching their new document management project, and the actors in the videos were the Flintstones. So it was a really fun way to engage staff, but still deliver the critical training that users needed. Also, ask your vendors again if they can help here. Many vendors offer online training courses that you can recommend to users looking for additional support. This can be especially useful for super advanced users that are looking for in-depth material that you probably don't have the time or maybe even the expertise to develop. And you won't always be available to answer users' questions, nor will they always feel comfortable asking. You can post some helpful resources that demonstrate how to use the system on the organization's intranet page that is easily accessible for everyone. If you need some help developing the guide, your vendor can help here as well. They should have documents that you can leverage. Also, keep track of frequently asked questions that come up as you're going through the onboarding process and document the answers in a page on the intranet. As new users join the project, this will be something that they can continuously reference, and it'll save you from answering the same question 47 times. As you build a comprehensive support and training plan, consider the usefulness of each of these training opportunities. They all have a time and place. Pages on the intranet are an excellent ongoing help resource for quick questions or basic information. Classroom training is great for people that are struggling and need to understand the new technology because these trainings give them a chance to raise their questions and get an immediate answer from the instructor. Web-based training is good for the content that everyone needs to know, and it's scalable and flexible. And throughout the 4 stages, we've gone through quite a few training tips and techniques and change management programs. And if we map them all out on the change adoption curve and put them together, we actually have a comprehensive change management plan to onboard our users. We can develop a timeline for each of these activities. This will be helpful to guide your plans and processes and will reassure leadership that you have a fully planned approach. When you're ready, you can turn off access to the old way of doing things. If it's an old system you're switching from, then limit the access. If you're switching from a paper-based process, then maybe move the paper out of the office to a temporary storage facility before you shred. But once you've made the switch, don't forget to keep reinforcing your project. When you've reached this point, you've reached a huge milestone, and you should absolutely celebrate. But a change agent's work is never done.
Isn't that the truth, Katie? Because change is an inevitable part and truth of life, and there's no running away from it. But if change is well planned and formulated, it can produce positive results. So a few things we wanted to make sure you took away from today's class. First, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Now, this should be familiar to anyone who's read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and it's one of my favorites. It really means don't just say what you want to say. You have to say what you want to say in a way that the person you're communicating with will want to hear it. And again, if you sort of walk through your 4P and your future states exercise, you'll understand the viewpoint of the people you're talking to. And this really is a central part of marketing. It's having the value proposition and communicating with people from the place that they're coming from. And it isn't just about talking. It's also about listening. And again, we've talked a lot about communication, and communication isn't just about what's coming from your mouth, it's what's coming into your ears. As one of my mentors used to tell me, there's a reason why you have 1 mouth and 2 ears. It's because you should be listening twice as much as you talk. And, you know, Katie, do you ever wonder if you're listening to people sincerely?
I certainly try to.
You know, when you're talking to someone, do you ever give one of the following replies after they pause? I went through the very same thing. Let me tell you about my experience, or I know exactly how you feel.
I definitely do that. I want to show people that I can relate to them.
Right. Do you think the person that is telling you something wants to hear about you, or do you think they want to talk about themselves?
Well, everybody wants to hear about me, right?
And as people, that's often something we're guilty of, right? But a person's most favorite topic to talk about is themselves. And so when you're following up, when you're waiting for someone to pause so you can follow up with, I know exactly how you feel, let me tell you about me, you're doing anything but listening. Because when you're listening with empathy, instead of, when you're not agreeing with someone, that's showing sympathy. Empathy is about understanding the message that the other person is trying to convey to you. That's seeking first to understand. It's true listening. And giving someone the feeling that you're truly listening has great impact on your relationship. It's the reason why others have a good perception of you. People will start to feel that you're open, that you truly care, and they'll start opening themselves up to you. And you'll understand where they're coming from, which will greatly help you in your change management activities. You'll be able to better tailor your communication to address their specific concerns. So again, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And of course, communication. This is no surprise. How many times have we talked about communication?
Many.
At least 10 times, right?
We should not be discouraged by that, according to our own material.
Yes, we should not be. It's all about communication. And as a leader, you cannot over-communicate. You cannot over-communicate when you're asking people to change. In fact, every successful leader who has led technology change, in my experience, makes this statement in retrospect. If I could do something different, I'd communicate earlier, I'd communicate more, I'd communicate differently. So here are some tips. You want to communicate consistently, frequently, and through multiple channels, including speaking, writing, video, training, bulletin boards, intranets, and any way you can about this change. You want to make sure people understand what's happening. You want to communicate everything you know as soon as you know it. And you want to tell people you're telling them what you know as soon as you know it, so information may change. You want to communicate the changes in such a way that people understand the context, the purpose, and the need for the change. Again, this goes back to the 4 Ps. What's the purpose? Why are you doing this? What are the benefits? What is going to have to change? You want to provide significant amounts of time for people to ask questions, request clarification, and provide input. I mean, how many of us have been part of a scenario where someone presented their changes, probably on a PowerPoint, and then fled? And you're left wondering, wait, what? What just happened? Why? You know this is not good news for change integration. Or the alternative, you received an email like, this is the way things are going to be, and you have no way to ask questions. And in the lack of being able to have an honest discussion, that's where the rumor mill takes over. And that's deadly for a change leader. Recognize that true communication is a conversation. It's two-way. Real discussion and real listening must result. It's not a presentation, it's not an email. It's sitting down and having lots of discussion, one-on-one, small groups, and it's repeating the same thing over and over and over and making sure everyone is on board and their concerns are addressed. And truly provide answers to questions only if you know the answer. You destroy your credibility when you provide incorrect information or backpedal. So if you don't know the answer, say so. That's a great question, Katie. Unfortunately, I don't know. I'm going to have to find out and get back to you. It'll probably take me a day or so. Is that okay?
Yes.
Exactly. Better than making something up on the spot and then finding out it's not the truth. So be honest, be clear, and be straightforward. But finally, remember to make it fun. You know your organization best, and you know what will work, whether it's Flintstones videos or neon pink t-shirts. Don't be afraid to inject some humor in your change management plan. Because remember, your change effort is a process. It's a dolphin. It's small efforts over a long period of time, not a whale, one giant splash. Don't be the person who sends the email and says, here's our new system, surprise, and then walks out. marshal your organization through the change management curve, use the training timeline, walk through the exercises, and understand what you're going to face, and you will be leading a very successful change management effort. So with that, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and Katie and I will be happy to answer that.
Yes, so to get started right away, I know we've had a couple people asking about the slides. People would like copies of the slides. We'd be happy to share them. Go ahead and send me an email. This is Katie, and I would be happy to send those over. To confirm again, we will be sending out a recording to this webinar within the next few days, so keep an eye out in your email for that. That email will also contain instructions for the learning assessment for those of you looking to receive IAMC credit for this web session. So we've had a couple questions come in as we go. Let me pull up a couple. We have a question from Dawn that says, what if we don't have the responsibility to make change, but it's required? For example, I'm offering to move my office to the basement of the building so that we can open up more space for other departments in our town hall building. My boss is resisting because he wants me to be visible to the public. I feel the basement is fine, as the senior center used to be down there for 25 years. How do I manage that? What do you think, Melissa?
Well, it's funny, I'm dealing with a similar change right now where I'm trying to stop doing something that we've done because we've always done it this way. And I would probably make a business case for it. What would be the pros, what would be the cons, and also talk to some other champions. You know, Katie talked about enlisting evangelists. Talk to some other folks and see if you can get them on board. People that you know your boss knows and trusts their opinions, so they can, you know, be your advocate. I find that to be very successful. Sometimes I don't always, you know, Katie mentioned she uses me as a backup. I have people that I use with particular stakeholders where I know that they will trust someone else's opinion more than mine.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I don't know who exactly would be moving into your current space, but it would be great if they could tell your boss about how excited they are to have more space and you know, what all of this space could really do for them. You know, to see that this is having an impact on other people and really a positive effect will reinforce to your boss that this is a good decision.
And particularly, I think, when you're working on that case, you can point out the positive impact that move might have on citizens. If the person who will be moving into, if the department that will be moving into that space, you know, if you can point out that type of impact that you could have for citizens at large.
Definitely, definitely. Another question came in. We have Rhonda asking here about her new boss. She says that I have been working on a change initiative and initially got confirmation and buy-in from executives, but then executive management changed. Now I need to get the support of my new boss. What should I do? That can be tough because you're like, I've already been through this. What do I do now? But I think, you know, walking them through the process so far and what you've done and showing the impact that you've had in the process will really help.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on your organization. It may be helpful to show that you've already gotten executive buy-in that may make them feel more comfortable with getting on board with it and kind of walking them through what you've done so far. And it also comes down to personality-wise, as someone who's switched bosses a few times, is understanding your new boss. How do they think? How do they, you know, what information do they like to see? It can be very challenging to change from one person who's very driven by numbers to someone else who really wants to be involved in seeing the technology. So understanding what are the things they like to see and how much do they want to be involved in the decision and what are their motivating factors. And it may just be sitting down and having a discussion with them. You know, this is what I've been working on. I'd really like to, you know, have you involved in it, but what would you like to see to keep moving this forward?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely good advice. We have a question here from Sarah saying, how do you recommend going about implementing change when one of the stakeholders is someone that you don't have a particularly good relationship with?
That's tough. That is tough, and also something I've dealt with on a few occasions. And again, it's understanding the okay zone.
Yeah.
Is this someone you really have to have, like, as a champion? Do they how okay do they have to be with your project? I've had come up with this situation a few times. One time I was able to sort of go around that stakeholder, like I was able to get everyone else on board, and then they just sort of overruled that person, so I sort of went around them. And in another instance, I had to get them on board, so I used someone else who was a champion to talk to them and get them on board. So I think it's really understanding how okay they have to be with your project.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a prime example of there's nothing wrong with someone that's neutral, and really understanding the relationships that this person has within the organization. Just because you have a bad relationship doesn't mean that they don't have a great relationship with someone else, and maybe that's somebody, a middleman that you could use to, like as Melissa said, to be a champion for you.
Yeah, Katie and I teach another class on getting buy-in for your business case, and we talk a lot about stakeholders and mapping out who's who. And are they a blocker, and why are they a blocker? Is it because they're just difficult and they hate everything? Is it because they're pushing their own initiative, or are they just, are they neutral, or are they a champion? So understanding where they fall sort of on that continuum and how to deal with them and how to use the resources you have.
You also might consider thinking about, is there a piece of the project that you could essentially get their input on? So, if you take this whole project to somebody and say, I want to implement electronic records management, they might say, no, that'll never work. But if you say, hey, I know you have expertise in records management, I wanted to get your opinion. If we were to approach our situation this way, what do you think would be, the best way to do this? And really kind of steering the conversation that way. Because sometimes then they feel like you're essentially presenting your idea and making them think that they thought of it. And that's a good way to get people to buy in. I know I've had a couple other questions come in to share a little bit about the IIMC, CMC, or MMC credits. To reinforce here, we will be sending out an email over the next few days, so you can keep an eye out for an email from Katie Burke at Laserfiche. That email will contain instructions. There is a short learning assessment that you will need to complete to get credits, and you can complete the learning assessment, email it back to me by September 1st, and I will issue a certificate of completion for you. And you can email me directly with any questions. All right, it looks like we have time for one more question here. We'll take a question from Florence. I guess it's more of an anecdote that we can comment on. She says, I work for a financially challenged community, and the administration is reluctant to make changes because of the original financial output, even though it will be cost-effective in the long term. That's tough. It's tough to, get that capital investment up front. Mm-hmm. You might consider looking at some other approaches, some other ways around it. So can you start small with a smaller investment? Or, from a technology perspective, sometimes we look at subscription models as opposed to buying a product all at once up front.
Or even cloud, which is you don't have to invest in the hardware.
Exactly.
Which would be a big expense.
So a lot of times there are some different approaches to the same project that you can take that minimizes that upfront investment and allows you to spread it over a couple years.
The other thing you can look at too, I know some people have found to be very effective, is seeing if your state has grants for records management programs, and also just really looking at the cost. A lot of times we don't look at the cost of maintaining a file room or storing paper, and that does have a cost associated to it. So really looking at the numbers associated with how you are doing things right now and thinking about, would you be able to, sort of eliminate enough money and shift the costs around to be able to find the money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Again, if you would like the PowerPoint, I'd be happy to share the PowerPoint with you. This is Katie Burke. Send me an email, and I will share it with you. Also keep an eye out for a second email with the link to the webinar recording and instructions for the learning assessment for that IIMC credit. It was really our pleasure to present today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It was a great pleasure.
Yes, and we appreciate your participation. Look forward to hearing about your successful change initiatives soon.
Have a wonderful day.